and I'm going to take us live. Give me just a minute to get the privacy settings adjusted. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Systems of Our Culture Mental Health. I'm happy to have with me Tony Autry, who is our moderator for this evening, as well as our three panelists who I'm going to introduce now. So first up, we have Dr. Karyetta Walker, LCMHC, who has focused on the treatment of trauma since 2009. She has worked in the field of mental health over the last 20 years. She began utilizing evidence-based treatment models when she joined Crossroads CAC in 2009 as a child therapist. She has since birthed her private practice, New Season Clinical Services, PLLC, in 2013, as she continues to provide contracted direct care services to children, adults, and their families who have been gravely impacted by significant trauma exposures, healing beyond their traumas. She has an MS in counseling from NC State University and a doctorate EDD in counseling psychology from Advocacy University. She has been licensed in North Carolina since 2008. Next up, we have Reverend Tamara Kersey. Reverend Kersey is employed as a manager with a health insurance organization in the Triangle. She leads a staff of analysts who manage the data integrity of 3 million healthcare members across the state of North Carolina. She is also the associate pastor at Johnson's Chapel AME in Mebane. Tamara's civic involvement reflects her values of social activism, education, and empowerment. As the former pastor of Maxwell Chapel, she instituted Freedom Talks as an auxiliary of the Social Action Commission. She has served nonprofit and university boards in various capacities and is a co-founding member of Alamance Pride, whose mission is to promote inclusion and diversity, provide opportunities for community outreach, and to educate ourselves, allies, and others about the importance of equality. She is a member of the Alamance Aging Services Committee, Alamance NAACP, and a member of the Alamance Burlington School System Equity and Diversity Committee. Tamara is a member of the advisory board of the Institute for Early Career Clergy Development at Hood Theological Seminary. She also served one term as the program co-chair for Technology Network of Women, Tech Now, encouraging and mentoring women in STEM-based careers. And lastly, but certainly not least, we have author Adrian Barr. Adrian Barr is a 14-year human resources professional and mental wellness advocate. She is also an Amazon Teacher's Pick and international best-selling author of Dancing with Butterflies, Discovering Mindfulness Through Breathing, which is a children's book designed to educate children on how to overcome anxiety through breathing techniques. Her desire is to normalize mental wellness practices and conversations within communities of color to allow healing for parents and children. Adrian earned a Bachelor of Arts in Communications with a minor in telecommunications at Johnson C. Smith University. Adrian often jokes that her daughter earned the degree with her, as she had her daughter a few months before she graduated. Adrian has been featured on Fox 46 Charlotte, the Burlington Times News, Women in the Arena podcast, the Unlearned documentary, and several other platforms. She enjoys doing community service, spending time with family and friends, and various other activities in the Triad of North Carolina. And now that you have met our panelists, I will turn it over to Tony Autry.
Sorry about that. I had the sound going on the Facebook too. I didn't want to miss any other questions. All right. The first question I have are, what things are important for everyone to know about their own mental health and about seeking mental health treatment?
I think I'll start, if it's okay. One of the things that I like to remind people is to know the difference between um, what is circumstantial regarding our mental health and what is genetic. Um, some things, an event happens and your mental health changes. Your level of thinking is altered. That's a different type of mental health treatment that an individual may need in comparison to if it's genetic. Some people are genetically predisposed to certain type of mental illnesses. So if you look through their family history, every woman has suffered with depression, or every woman has suffered with anxiety. So you know that they are genetically predisposed to having that type of alteration, kind of like in their brain chemistry, if you will. So one of the things for everyone to know is that one, mental health, the need for mental health services can happen to anyone. And it's up to the individual to understand and to be honest with themselves. We like to say, examine ourselves and decide what you're actually needing and be honest enough to know. I often say to people, we'll go get our eyes checked, we'll get our hearing checked, we'll make sure high blood pressure and diabetes for most people is okay, but it's something about our mental health that's still taboo. So understand, one, it is not a taboo issue. It is a part of our self-care that's a necessity for us to be aware of on a day-to-day basis.
Thank you, Dr. Walker. I'm glad that the actual professional in the field was the first one to answer that question. Primarily, even before we can get there, we talk about our culture as African Americans and the stigma behind mental health. And even as of last week, I was talking to someone who talked about the shame of feeling like there was something wrong with them, or that they weren't all there, or that their life did not seem like this picture perfect ideal, and not wanting to seek that mental health. So the first thing I think would be to educate, even at an early age, about the need to get assistance when it comes to mental health. I'm a primary advocate. I know in the Black church, and I say I'm a servant of the Black church. I'm a product of the Black church. So therefore, I'm going to critique the Black church because I have served a lot of time in the Black church. When it comes to faith, I believe that a lot of times we just want to pray things away. We ridicule people and say, well, your faith is not strong enough, or you didn't pray. So I think between our faith culture and then our culture as Black people, we have kind of ostracized persons who do not have this standard or this image or wear this mask or uphold the image of being all together. We talk about resilience. We talk about being able to persevere, but in that persevering and that resilience, there are a lot of broken people who have soul injury. And that soul injury then becomes, I guess it perpetuates these behaviors that then are categorized as bad behavior or renegade or rebellious. However, they are responding to these internal traumas that have not been addressed. So how we educate will be to remove the stigma that mental health is needed. Educating that it is okay to be depressed, to Dr. Walker's point. It is okay to have feelings. It is okay not to feel like you have it all together. So breaking that stigma down, and then removing that wall that says you need to present this perfect face will be the first step in helping people to accept the fact that talking to a therapist, talking to a counselor, addressing mental health issues is not taboo. And again, I'm just speaking from my culture and my faith lens, because that is something that I see repeatedly in the lives of people who are 70 and 80 years old, who have just been taught to toe the line, be strong, quote the scripture, pray it away, and they are suffering from traumas that have happened when they were 7 and 8 years old, and they've been carrying this burden for 60 years, and they're wounded. So having the education, removing the stigma, promoting and advocating, is going to be the first step. And I believe we need to do it in our education system. We need to do it in our organizations. We need to do it from our pulpits. Like, we need to be advocates and sound that clarion call to say, it is okay to talk to someone, that you can get the tools and the resources that you can be healed. I'm all about the wholeness and the wellness and the healing mind, body, and soul, and being those advocates for that. So I think before people can seek mental health treatment, there has to be some advocacy and some education to say it's okay to seek help.
I definitely have to echo both of y'all's sentiments and your comments. I fully agree with that. I also would like to add, just don't compare yourself to any of your family members that are before you, right? So just because grandma, mom, dad, whoever did not get the help that they needed, does not mean that that you're less than or weaker than or any different than your family. I know in our culture, we have a tendency to compare ourselves to our ancestors, but we also have more opportunities than they did. And that's how you really start clearing those generational curses, right? Because we do know that mental illness, like Dr. Walker mentioned, it can definitely be genetic. And when you start looking at your family in total, you can kind of start to see what may have been the thing that maybe started it within your parent, right? So if you have, and I'll use myself as an example because why not? So I know that, my parents, they split up, but learning their dynamics and how they grew up and how that played into my childhood and how that affects certain dynamics of my relationships, like that's a great place to start too. Just really start looking in, removing the shame, as was already stated, and just don't compare yourself to others. If that's what you need, what your soul needs, there's no shame. No one needs to know what it is that you're doing, because that's a personal connection between you and the therapist that you choose. And honestly, we all waited however long we waited to get grown. So it still ain't nobody's business if we need to take care of ourselves fully, totally, mentally, physically, and spiritually. And I know for me personally, when I was looking for a therapist, I had certain boxes that I wanted checked. I know for me, I didn't want to have to explain my Black experience. So it was very important that I had a Black therapist. And I also wanted to make sure that, my therapist was female, so I prayed for that. God definitely delivered that. And, it's regardless of where you be best for you, figure out how you're feeling, do some introspection to see, where you might need some help, and just be ready to have those conversations openly. So, you can actually heal, because you have to be willing to receive the healing when you go to see a therapist. You can't come in with fists closed.
Thank you. I have two follow-up questions based on things that you all said. One, you said that we need to start teaching it at a young age. What age would you advise that children start learning about mental health and being aware of those obstacles that they may be facing?
I'm not an educator, but as soon as they're able to speak, a baby asks for their needs by crying, and they're vocalizing based on the language that they have at the time. And as soon as they're able to verbalize any sense of injustice or sense of being mistreated or sense of hurt or pain, we need to give credence to that and allow them to cry, allow them to feel embarrassed, allow them to be hurt, and then coach them through that and say, oh, you're feeling, and whatever the feeling might be, you feel embarrassed, or, you feel mistreated, and give credence to that. Because a lot of times, in my generation, we always said, well, boys don't cry. So we, don't cry. My dad, he's 82 years old. And I remember him saying, you need to dry your tears up. Boys don't cry. And so we began to suffocate the natural progression of people being able to emote and give lens to what those emotions are. So as soon as they're able to speak, and sometimes you may need to give them the definition of what they're feeling. They know that something is amiss, but they may not have the language for it. So as soon as they can speak, and I'm not an educator, like I'm not, degreed, But I do have the experience from a faith and a cultural perspective to see how we could have done better by at least persons in my generation to give credence to those emotions.
Yeah,
Any other panelists?
I definitely agree with you, Reverend Tamara. I know it's important to have those open conversations and to let your child know that it's safe to have those conversations and that you're there with them. It's a partnership. So as soon as you're able to, I agree with that.
I would agree also. Just to give some free tips, if you will, you can YouTube. We YouTube all types of things for our kids, but there are programs out there, explaining feelings to kids, defining feeling words for kids. I'm always amazed, not amazed anymore, but when I first started out, like how few feeling words we knew. And that's the culture of the human race. It wasn't a Black thing, white thing, Hispanic thing. It didn't matter the culture. We just didn't really have a feeling vocabulary. So every other person, it was happy, sad, mad. And we couldn't really experience anything beyond that. So being able to expand, when you say how young, incorporate it in our day-to-day language. Understanding that our kids take a lot of their cues from us as the adults. So how do we handle anger? How do we handle when we're sad? Can we even be honest and acknowledge that, I'm uncomfortable right now, or I'm doing, like, every day is not an excited, on a scale of 1 to 10, a 10 day, so how do I treat people around me when my day is a 2, or I'm frustrated, so we end up learning how to not only name it, but how to execute, if you will, those feelings. So I agree with everyone, all the panelists so far, is that we have to do a better job of being honest about our own feelings, because it's hard to teach someone something that you don't do. So being able to expand that feeling vocabulary and put that into practice. I'm also big on not always being able to define it for children, but not always telling them how they feel, because sometimes we may misinterpret it. So if you tell me I'm angry all the time and I'm like, well, no, I'm really sad, then we'll have a generation, for some reason, feeling angry makes us feel powerful. And when we're sad, we're weak. So people will acknowledge anger, but it's very challenging for them to acknowledge, no, I'm feeling really sad right now. I'm feeling lonely. So the core of feelings is beyond happy, sad, mad. I don't even like the one mad. I prefer angry. And I teach my kids when I'm working with that mad sounds like we're an out of control animal. No, we have control. We can express these in a healthy way. But yes, as soon as you can start incorporating those, there are feeling charts available that you can pull down. There's so many. Ms. Barr, I think, gave the perfect analogy. Like, this is a different day and time. If you want to find it, like, you can almost find it for free online right now, and incorporate it in the day-to-day lives for our children to be able to help them with being able to not only identify, but also being able to acknowledge the feelings that they are having, especially in such a time that we're living in right now.
Thank you. The second follow-up question I had was, Adrienne, you talked about the things that you went through as far as finding a therapist. Sometimes there's a stigma that, therapy doesn't work because they've picked the wrong therapist. So can you explain why it's important to pick the right therapist for you?
For me, it's, in order for me to be completely open with somebody at that level, I need to make sure that I am comfortable with them. So it's a comfort thing. So you need to figure out what it is you're comfortable with, and what that looks like for you. There's several ways that you can find a professional. Obviously, you can just do a Google search and kind of see it's a situation where you can interview the person, right? Because you have to know and be comfortable. Otherwise, again, it's not that it doesn't work. It's just that that may not have been the right person for you, right? It does work if you allow it to, and it really is just that simple, you know? And sometimes we need somebody who challenges us in such a way. So we need somebody who we can be honest with, but isn't going to give us an out. You need that accountability, right? I appreciate friendships and relationships that check me respectfully. So, you know, I know my doctor, she definitely did a fantastic job at being 100% honest with me, being able to read my cues, whether that be, you know, I have a loud face. We all know this. So whether that be facial expressions, fidgeting, or even just silence, you know, it was an incredible experience. And the type of therapy that I went to, it wasn't a one-on-one, it was a group therapy, which that was very interesting for me as well, because one of my biggest issues, other than security, was definitely trust, right? I am a very private person, so that was something that, of course, the entire thing was confidential, but it allowed me to get myself out of that self-imposed prison I had put myself in because I'm hiding and hoarding everything, right? But that's what worked for me. You just have to make sure that whatever you feel like would work for you work best, but you really do have to truly just allow. Do your research and allow. You're on mute, friend.
Yep. Thank you for that. The second question we have is, what are the stigmas that exist as it pertains to people of color seeking mental health treatment? Where do you think these stigmas came from? What do you think they're rooted in? It's a loaded question, so feel free to take your time with this one.
I want to jump in, but I was looking at Dr. Walker.
Me too.
Okay.
From a historian, Dr. Walker, you're going to take it, and then I'll come right behind you.
Okay. Because you alluded to it earlier. For, you know, we don't know who's on the call race-wise. So the reality is some of it is embedded in our culture. You know, I want to go way back, slavery times, where we were rape, beat, whatever, and we were just supposed to put that smile on our face and sing that song and pick that cotton and do whatever, and we were just supposed to take it. And, you know, because if you shared that emotion, if you said what it was, then that meant more abuse. So it goes way back. We talk about policing and how that started. I believe our challenges with mental health goes back that far, because we're in a situation where we've been indoctrinated, if you will, if we're not careful, that we're just supposed to smile no matter what. And that's fine in its right place, but everyone has to have their safe place to be able to deal with what you can't divulge to everyone. But it has to be someone that you can actually take those layers off. I don't, and I'll just self-disclose, I don't want to be Dr. Walker everywhere I go. I need somewhere where I can be Karyetta and I can deal with me. So all of us have to have that space. And that's just not, we love to think that's just only in God's presence. But sometimes we need, you know, I'll put it like this. I love the scripture where it talks about Lazarus, and Jesus calls Lazarus from the grave, right? And the part about that scripture that I absolutely adore is that he looks at the men and tell them to loose him and let him go. He did not leave it up to Lazarus himself to untangle himself. And so many times we will think that we have to do it by ourselves in order to survive. And I think that is one of the biggest tricks that's used against us, that isolation literally can bring destruction if you don't temper that.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where I think a lot of those stigmas come from, and generationally, we've just perpetuated that, what goes on in this house stays in this house.
You took that
So-
from me. I was going to say that.
Oh, I'm sorry. I apologize.
okay.
But yeah, it's embedded that we perpetuate that, regardless of how unhealthy that it is. And we're left the shame we talked about earlier. And so we've mastered as a people how to wear a mask. We've mastered it.
Yeah.
To our demise in a lot of circumstances. And I always say that avoidance is a coping skill, it's just not a productive one. So we have mastered how to avoid, not to deal with, to ignore. So when someone asks us how we're doing, it is innate to say we're fine. And it can be all over us that we're not, but that's what we give back, because we've been taught that we have to be fine no matter what.
I'm going to interject for just a minute. The Facebook Live went down. I've restored it, but I'm going to have to take us live again. For those who are watching on Zoom, you're going to continue to see the same screen that you're seeing. For those who have been watching on Facebook, this will pick up as a part 2, and then I will upload the full video later. Give me just a minute.
It got too real in the room. That's what happened.
I believe so. Dr. Walker, you've been reading my notepad.
Uh-huh.
Because I had 2 or 3 of the things that you had already mentioned.
Oh, wow.
Mm-hmm.
We're walking in agreement. That's awesome.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
All right, we're back up. Go ahead, Reverend Kersey.
All right. I took a note from Dr. Walker that said avoidance is a coping skill, but not a productive one. And when the question came, where did the stigma exist and what was it rooted in? And that's the question that we're addressing right now. I have to go back to the Middle Passage. And I have to go back again from my cultural lens, how persons from another country are now being stripped of their heritage, their language, their food, their relationships, familial structures, coming into a new world where they're needing to learn how to adapt. Any form of resistance could cause death, and you lose your life. So that coping and that masking and that suppression happened over 400 years ago. 1, 2, then again, I'll talk from my generation. It was what goes on in this house stays in this house. So the concept of secrecy and shame is embedded at a very young age, because you're told not to give voice to something that doesn't feel good. You're told not to communicate when something is amiss. So those things are embedded and rooted, not just in our culture. And again, I'm speaking from my African-American lens, but also generationally from 400 years ago in the transition of the Middle Passage. And from that perspective, I think it continues to, again, create this kind of ideal where you don't give voice to pain, you don't give voice to suffering, you just forge ahead and you are resilient and you have Black power and you overcome the odds and you can have victory. But it never really deals with the rooted trauma that we experience. So again, I would go back to Dr. Walker's point, as enslaved persons coming through the Middle Passage, and then culturally, that whole idea of secrecy and shame that kind of creates that root of not being able to give voice to the things that we need to be healthy, mind, body, and soul. I go back to the mental wellness that we need.
I definitely agree with both of the panelists. And then I just kind of want to shift it to a visual perspective as well. You know, when you really think back about when, you know, Black, because I have to speak from my lens as well, when Black people were allowed to be in film, you know, they were always the, you know, the maid, the tragic mulatto, you know, the Jezebel who maybe, you know, she had the attitude, but how did she turn out? You know, so, you know, I think, and not just then, but also now they continue to perpetuate, you know, those stigmas, just saying, okay, well, you can be this, this, and this, but your voice doesn't matter. You know, so they do a really good job at continuing to ingrain those thought processes in us. And, you know, we definitely have to work to shift away from that, which we're in such a beautiful time right now that people are waking up, so to speak, and taking their mental wellness more seriously, using day-to-day practices like meditation or prayer, you know, yoga, things like that, to really just, or therapy even, to just really shift their lifestyles and to just know that there's a better way to handle things than what we've been shown and what our history tells.
Thank you. Third question we have is, how does the Black church factor into the conversation about mental health?
I'm going to take that one first, and I really don't have much to say about that. I did talk about that earlier in our discussion. I'm going to give a scenario to talk about how I would say jaded. And I'm going to say again, I'm a product, a student, and a servant of the Black church. And I feel like I have the authority to critique the Black church of what we have and have not done. And I'm just going to provide a classic example. I served a church where a great uncle of this woman's granddaughter molested the child, the little girl. And the response to some of the leaders was, well, he didn't penetrate her. So it's almost as if there is this excusable behavior, whether it's male patriarchy, whether it's this avoidance is a coping skill, but it's not productive. I'm quoting Dr. Walker. And we're not really addressing the tragic issues that happen because we're avoiding. You know, we don't want to bring that level of accountability. We don't want to have the difficult conversation. So we're so accustomed to masking. We don't want the scandal. We want to sweep it under the rug. And there are all kinds of violent behaviors happening under the guise of religion. We see it worldwide. The trust in the Black church is eroding because of this lack of accountability. The ability to be authentic is eroding because we will uphold one narrative and not hold people accountable where they should be. And again, I'm going to raise the LGBTQ flag right here because there are many persons who have an identity in this LGBTQ community who are products of molesters, who are products of pedophiles, who have been sexually assaulted. And because of avoidance, their perpetrators have not been held accountable, but we want to demonize, ostracize, and marginalize those people who have found safe haven in those persons who will accept them and not reject them. So there is a problem, there is a plague, there is an issue of avoidance where we will uphold some standard that is incongruent with the whole concept of love and acceptance and who Jesus really has called us to be. And, you know, something I learned in seminary says, in order for there to be a villain, you know, the oppressed become the oppressor. That's something I learned in seminary. The people who have been oppressed now become the oppressor. So we have to find someone to demonize so that we can feel elevated. And we do that so routinely that I don't even think we see ourselves, that we're discriminating, that we're being hateful, that, you know, violence does not come just in a physical act. It comes in the way that we embrace or not embrace each other. Violence comes in the way of the things that we're silent about. You know, we're silent about pedophiles. We're silent about sexual assault. We're silent about those men who have multiple relationships or committing adultery. But, you know, let a woman do something and, you know, she is really going to be hung on the stake like, and put the scarlet letter on her chest. So I believe that the Black church is complicit in the violence and the deterioration of mental health in our community, because we just want to pray things away. We want to sweep it under the rug. We want to avoid the difficult conversations. We want to pretend like we all have it all together. And then for the people who we feel or deem are not equal to us, we push them to the side. We, I guess I would say, reject. Again, rejection is a big thing, because I believe that the love of God is for all people. And it says, let the wheat and the tares grow together, and the Lord God will do separating. And we become the judge because we have been oppressed, and we perpetuate that on other people. So that's my soapbox, and I stand by my convictions that until we're able to embrace everyone, number one, and then number two, are able to hold people accountable for the violence that they are doing against our children, against our women, against even the very fabric of our culture, the Black church is losing its power, it's losing its credibility, because there is too many people who are so much more concerned about position, power, titles, money, and numbers, that we're not dealing with the soul and the heart and the mental wellness of the people who are under our watch. And we're going to be held accountable for that by a greater judge. And it's not going to be on somebody's social media post. It is not going to help you with your financial books. You are not going to be able to escape the divine retribution and judgment that's coming, because some of the things that we've done in our church to demonize people who God has called us to love. And I'm going to go on mute because I can go on about that. So I'll pass the mic to the next person.
I'm going to say thank you for everything that you said, because that's everything that I could have ever said. Church for me is about relationship with God first and foremost, right? But then, we're supposed to be in relationship with others. And that's where the church itself, just from my observation, because I'm just a member, I'm not a clergy, but from my observation, that's really where we struggle, is with having relationship with the individual, as opposed to, forming little cliques. And sometimes it can get real juvenile inside of a church with the adults, and not meeting the community's needs either, or advising people just to pray things away and question their faith, as you mentioned earlier. You got this going on, well, why aren't you praying away? It's like, okay, so faith without works is dead. So if you're just praying and you're not getting the help that you need, how are you expecting to get better? But that's all I got to say.
Well, how does the Black church factor into the conversation? I think it goes back to our comments about, and I agree with you ladies, it goes back to the conversation about educating. The Black church historically has been the training center for our culture. When we couldn't go to school, we could go to church, right? So, that is one factor that the Black church can continue. Some are doing a fantastic job of that, but continue to accept, to educate, to support people that may have challenges. A lot of churches that I know of, have referral systems that they understand that there's a difference between pastoral counseling and mental health counseling. So if it's beyond pastoral, then they may refer to an outside entity that they've developed relationships with to get a different type of assistance. So I think that's one way that the church factors in. And I want to make sure we're very clear. Yes, can the church, and it's not just the Black church, I don't believe it's the church. We have church, but we also have kingdom. And, the kingdom suffers violence, right? So we know that biblically that is in line, that there will be an assault against the church. However, we have to understand the enemy of the church. And we know that even Jesus taught us how we treat the least, right? Those that we consider disenfranchised or not enough, or they don't meet up, then that's how we're treating him. And I think if we get back to the basics of loving people for people, you don't clean a fish and you haven't caught it yet. So oftentimes we try to clean people up before we've loved them in. And understanding that discipleship and ministry is looking different in this day, that everyone coming in is not going to look like they've always been in church. And the fact is, you can dress up anything, but it's the heart of a man that God is looking at. You know, so scripture talks about how the heart is desperately, deceitfully wicked. Who can know it but God? So understanding that we all need him. My faith, we all need the blood and the blood still works. So understanding very clear that there is a standard, I believe, that is being risen in the church, that there are churches that are still doing it God's way, that every church is not judgmental, every church is not condemning. And with all that we have that may be, God always has a ram. God always has a standard. And it's up to us, if you're in a place where you're being mistreated, mishandled, and all of those things, you have a personal responsibility to do what you have to do spiritually and get in the right place so you can be loved, so you can be nurtured, so you can be corrected, so you can be trained, so you can be delivered, so you can be healed. All of those things are still available in this century. So regardless of how many scandals we see, I always believe God always still have a people that's wanting to live holy and to live for him. So you guys didn't ask me for that part. You asked me for mental health.
We'll take it.
But when we're talking about the Black church, that rings true to me, because the truth is we're supposed to be the church. So how do I handle people outside the church, not just in, but outside? How can I be a witness? How can I personally disciple? How do I live my life before men? All of that is a part of how does the Black church factor into the conversation about mental health. Is all of our responsibilities. So if we're connected, then how do I see you struggle and not say anything? You know, I think Ms. Barr mentioned before, sometimes you have to be in a setting where you're going to be confronted and challenged. It's not about warm and fuzzy all the time. Sometimes you have to be in a place, even in a Black church, where someone is going to call a spade and say, that's not right. And you do need to change that. And I want to add, there's a difference between symptoms and behaviors. So sometimes as a society, even in the Black church, we're so behavior driven that we forget the symptoms that people are really struggling.
Yes.
So if I'm struggling and you see it, then have enough love and power to come get me and not watch me fail, because that's the love of Christ. What we will do to the least, that one that's struggling, if he's willing to leave the 99 to go get the one, then what's the problem with us?
And I want to just confirm what you're saying. This is something I thought about as I was looking at these questions. We deal with the fruit and not the root. And that is why there seems to be this ideal that, you know, from the outside, we want to latch on to the behavior. So a child who's hungry, a child who acts out in school, it's not because they can't learn. You're not dealing with the root cause of why they're displaying this behavior. And I believe that that's something that we perpetuate. And I do love the Black church. I'm going to critique the Black church because I want us to do better. Holistically, just in my experience, is not the norm to have that non-judgment. And I see too many young people who don't want to connect with the church because they are struggling with symptoms. And the symptoms are not being addressed because we're so mask oriented. So I would want to encourage any people who are a part of the ecclesia, the body of Christ, not the Black church, but I want to encourage all of us to love people where they are and show the love of God and let them know that they are accepted. And to Dr. Walker's point, you know, you have to love them in before you can clean them up. I like that. I took that as a quote.
Thank you. I like that. Next topic, how do things like abuse, domestic violence, trafficking, and substance abuse factor into mental health? Go ahead, Dr. Walker.
There is something called the ACEs study. It's ACES, Adverse Childhood Experiences. And it's really talking about the serious childhood traumas that result in toxic stress that can harm a child's brain. So some things it's from childhood, and we're looking at research more and more to say that the human brain can be traumatized when a mother is actually carrying them now, not after they get here. So for example, if that mother is going through extreme stress during her pregnancy, you may have a child that's born with not being able to be soothed, things of that nature. So there's more and more research that's coming out about that. And how does it factor in? Literally what we say is that the more adverse childhood experiences that you experience, it increases the likelihood that it actually can possibly long-term impact your overall health. So it increases, I'm just going to read from the list: adolescent pregnancy, alcoholism and alcohol abuse, depression and other mental health issues, illicit drug use. And here's the part we don't think about: it leads to heart disease, liver disease, diabetes, smoking, suicide attempts, multiple sexual partners, intimate partner violence, or domestic violence, as we like to commonly state. So it impacts the ability to learn. You know, if my brain is wired all of the time, not knowing if I'm safe or not knowing when the next argument is going to break out, but you want me to sit still and read, my brain is in overdrive. You know, so it kind of wires the brain or miswires the brain and ends up affecting the way a person processes, literally. So sometimes when people are not wanting hugs, it's not that they're not warm, they just don't know what that hug means to them. So the brain would automatically, and I just taught this to someone today, the brain automatically goes into reaction mode. That's where you have the fight, the flight, but you also have freeze, where the person just cannot respond even if they want to. So it impacts a lot, difficulty in not only beginning relationships, but maintaining them. Dealing with, you know, people that can't maintain jobs, like when you start looking into adult life, how you manage your money, the way you spend, all of that can be stemmed back to what has the human brain really had to deal with. Now, all of us, the reality is, deal with trauma. We're in a traumatic world, but every traumatic event does not leave you traumatized. And we have to make sure we understand that, but some do. And the reality, it will change an individual. And a lot of times you may have, some things can gradually pass, but some things do not. So people go along for years, not only just being misdiagnosed, but not being diagnosed at all, because no one has asked those questions. What is really going on? It goes back to that secrecy that we were talking about earlier, but it will impact, particularly a child, their ability to learn, which will carry them into their adulthood if the appropriate treatment is not sought.
I have to jump on to say, just because several of those experiences that you mentioned, you know, I'm a product of, and it really does translate all the way into your adulthood if you don't get it taken care of, and it can manifest in all the ways that, you know, Dr. Walker mentioned. I know for me, I'm a workaholic, right? And that's how I avoided everything that was going on with me, that, you know, alcohol, drugs at one point, things of that nature. So if it's left unchecked, it's not just gonna go away because you avoided it, you know. So just if you need the help, honestly, go get it.
I want to talk from a personal lens about one aspect of this mental health question, and it's more so around substance abuse. I have seen substance abuse more prevalently, you know, more in my clergy or pastoral role. And I don't know if you all remember this meme about a year or two ago. It says, drugs aren't the marijuana, cannabis is not the gateway drug. Trauma, molestation, abandonment, that is the gateway. And as I'm learning more about mental health, one of the things it talks about is being able to regulate your nervous system from all of these traumas. And I have a family member who, as early as 11 years old, started smoking marijuana. I don't remember how he got introduced to it, but then being introduced to that and then going to another type of drug, there was some trauma that had been unaddressed. And that soothing, I think what I read is that, even as a baby or when newborns are preemies, the whole idea of holding them and rocking them helps to soothe and bring that connection. And a lot of times people are trying to find ways to soothe, and they're using substances to soothe, to regulate their nervous system, to escape the trauma. So I think when we start addressing mental health and substance abuse, a lot of times the question is, which comes first? Are we addressing mental health? Is there an underlying mental health issue because there were trauma, abandonment, something else going on that created some psychosis or some other underlying issue? Or are we truly addressing substance abuse? Because you can address the substance abuse, but that trauma and that unregulated nervous system or those poor coping skills are still there. So holistically, again, not looking at the symptoms, not looking at the behaviors, but looking at the symptoms is going to be most critical in us addressing and being more comprehensive in the approach to helping people towards their mental wellness.
Thank you. What disadvantages do people of color face as it pertains to mental health?
I have to say being locked up in the stigma itself, the shame itself. That's definitely one of our biggest disadvantages. More concerned about what other people have to say about us going to get it, teasing, things of that nature. And, before it became, acceptable, because it's becoming acceptable, it truly is, some of the names that we called each other for even just some of the simple things that we did would prohibit us from doing what is best for us, right? So, we have like the term sellout, things of that, very hurtful terms that we use within our culture, definitely hinders us from getting what it is that we need.
I would say access to care. Depending on what type of jobs, we go back to capitalism. I was thinking about that term when it comes to earlier when we said what were some of the root causes, and with capitalism and slave labor and Black labor and the type of jobs that we were eliminated from, there were certain things that we only were allowed to do. So even now we see, these ceilings or these doors that, it seems like you don't have as much diversity in some of the careers that will allow people to have the finances or the benefits to be able to get the kind of healthcare that they need. So one goes back to the advocacy. Two is the access to care. It is the financial freedom to be able to get the care. And again, I work for a healthcare organization, and for whatever reason, all of the mental health was, they contracted it as out of network. So even if you, depending on, regardless of what healthcare plan you had, you could not find an in-network therapist where you can pay your $30 copay. So you may be paying $100, $200 for a 1 hour therapist appointment. Who has that kind of money? And typically, you're going to meet with a therapist for 6 months, maybe, and 6 months is still just scratching the surface. So you're talking about $6,000 to address your mental health. So there is a financial barrier that disallows persons from being able to get the assistance that they need. And so when we talk about healthcare reform and access to care, and then whether it's, Dr. Walker talked about Medicare, Medicaid, what does that look like? So I would say it goes back to the whole idea of, historically, we have been barred from certain professions. We have not always had the access to care. And when we look across the demographic of the United States, where the per capita wealth in the African-American household is so much lower, it's like a percentage of 2% I don't know, it's like something extremely low of the entire wealth capita of the United States. So historically, Black people have not been able to forge ahead in this whole concept of financial stability. And then some of the results of that, the downstream impacts, are these things like health, mental wellness, education, the outcomes for our children. So again, downstream impacts of this whole idea of how do we become equal partners in this financial wealth capital across this nation.
Are there any programs available? I know you talked a lot about costs. Are there any programs that are free or maybe have a lower cost that people can take advantage of if they do not have the finances to attend therapy and they know that they have a need for it?
I can, you want to go ahead?
Quickly, I am not aware, unless there are community organizations or therapists who are willing to donate their time for free, there are not a lot of organizations, unless you have Medicare or Medicaid, that will give you those free services. And even if you have insurance, if you didn't have insurance at all, so again, I'm going to talk from a family member who had substance abuse and we were trying to get him care. He had Medicare and he was able to get some services. But if you had no insurance at all, you were paying out of pocket. You did not have anything. So either you had Medicaid. Either you had Medicaid. If you had no insurance, then the options for you were almost obsolete unless you can find a program that said we're going to donate a certain amount of our therapists to give, free care for mental illness.
I will jump in and say that a lot of our employers have an EAP program. It's an employee assistance program that your company does pay for. Everything that you discuss with that professional is completely 100% confidential. Your employer does not even know that you called them. A lot of people give it a bad name by calling it the suicide hotline. It is not. The EAP program, what it actually can do, it can talk to you about anything that is going on with you mentally. They can link you up with a counselor. Now, granted, those counseling sessions, they are limited, usually between 3 and 5 sessions, but at least it's a start. And then if you need more, they can also help you find resources within your community that are low cost or free. They can help you with grief counseling. If you're having some issues with your finances, they can help you with that. They truly are a smorgasbord of information that is right there at your disposal. It's good for you and every person in your household, and it is 100% free. And if there is any benefit that a lot of people overlook, dismiss, don't pay attention to, when your HR representative is giving you that information during that open enrollment or during your onboarding program, it is that one. I would highly recommend that everybody and put it on your refrigerator. You don't know if you need it, your spouse might need it, and they might not want to talk to you about it. But at least say, hey, this is what this is. If you need it, is here. Your kid can call. There's also some organizations out there that are, very specific. Like there's NAMI, they have a phone number that you can call. There are free resources that can at least get the ball rolling. And I'm sure Dr. Walker has some great insight on this. So go ahead and jump in, Dr. Walker.
Okay. The other thing, and I was going to say very similar about the financial piece, most of us do not pay attention to the back of our insurance card. Your mental health information for most insurance carriers is on the back of the card. So, quick lesson, usually your medical number is 1-800 number, is one of them. And then your mental health may be a total different number. People do not pay attention to what their mental health services include. So they may not be aware. They may come see me and say, my copay is $10. Like, okay, but send me the card. And when I get the card, that specialty rate on the front of some cards is what you would pay a mental health professional. Unless they agree to do a sliding scale to take that 10, you may have to pay them $50 or $80 per visit. Some people don't realize that they may have a higher deductible for their mental health benefits than they do for their medical piece. So we're still at a kind of impasse when it comes to including mental health as a nation in with our medical benefits. We still like to keep them separated, and that is costing a lot of people. So some programs, you can go on different websites, look up different therapists. Some may list that they do a sliding scale. Some may do cheaper if you're self-pay than what they would pay bill to the insurance company. Why? Because they don't have to use those man hours to do the billing. So what I always recommend for people before they come see me is call your insurance company, figure out what your deductible is, figure out what your copay is, because most of the time people do not know. So that is definitely an issue that comes up often with with everyone, to be honest, because people really do not know. We had a major reform in Medicaid July 1 in the state of North Carolina that impacted a lot of services. Forms were mailed out to people months ago, and the forms were written in a way that the average family that's contacting me did not understand the form, or they had moved and did not receive the form. And now they're in the midst of services, and their services now are held up. And what we're finding is a lot of these insurance companies have decided they're not going to doing retroactive date on a lot of the providers' contracts. So you're meaning people are going to see people for months for free. That's probably not going to happen in most entities. So once again, that is a factor that people really are not aware of, that things have definitely changed. Once it's settled and resolved, I'm certain it may be better. However, it's still not there yet. So people have to advocate for themselves, ask questions about, okay, I'm glad, because sometimes we're so excited to have insurance. So like, oh, I have insurance, but really not understanding what that insurance entails. So that is definitely a factor that we face. And we have to do a better job of listening. And my family used to tell us something as we were growing up with kids: if you ever want to hide it from us, put it in a book. So most families, when you get the insurance, you get this huge booklet of everything that's included in your insurance. And most of us don't take the time to read it. Let's just be honest. So we don't know, we know we're paying, we just don't know what we're paying for. So once again, that lack of that psychoeducation of understanding what we're actually paying for month to month. And that's why we're so shocked when we have to use it, because we think we have something because we've paid into it for so long, but it's not what we thought we had. So we have to do a better job of educating ourselves and taking personal responsibility, not just expecting that representative to tell us everything. Get the information, get the websites, look it up for yourself, read the questions, ask the questions. And it's okay to demand answers. And this day and time, if your service is not producing what you need, you have that period called the re-enrollment period, that you can do your research and you can get where you need to be to get the services that you need. So I find that to be definitely a major factor that we need to converse more and more about as a community.
And just to piggyback off the insurance piece, because you're absolutely right. People don't read their plan, their summary of their plans at all to see what pays what. But we're in August. A lot of people's employers are going to get into this open enrollment season. It's okay for you to ask for those forms now and really dig in to see your plan versus the plan that you didn't pick, right? Compare those two to see what it is that you think you may need and what it is that you need your plan to pay for, and see what's best for you. Because Dr. Walker is right, as an HR professional, we are not going to make that decision for you. We're going to tell you to make the best decision for you, yourself, your family, financially. But we're not going to tell you which one to pick. We're not going to do that. So it's always, best for you to be educated and to decide, read the document before open enrollment, before you choose, or change within that window. Absolutely. But go into it educated, or just, ask your benefits representative what it is, if they're going to be doing anything different, because a lot of companies are now recognizing that people they want services around mental health. So they want to be able to get those services. So a lot of companies, because of the way that the employment market is shifting, they're wanting to have more perks to retain their employees. So if you have those conversations now and they're not doing anything about it, maybe if enough people start having those conversations with their employer, that will inspire them to do something more for you, your workplace, and your coworkers.
Since we've gone here, I'm going to do a twofold question and kind of combine two in one. And this kind of explanation that you guys just gave, one of the questions was how might the mental health system work against us, that we've kind of covered like insurance and financial barriers. So maybe expand if there's anything else. And then also, what action steps can we take to move forward with changing how the system works in our community?
I'm not so much sure, and I won't, I do work for an insurance company, and I kind of know a lot about, providers. I work more on the technology side, but one of the things I would like to see for our community, and EAP, it's almost like an elitist concept, because you kind of assume that people who are working cafeteria jobs or fast food jobs, they may only work 30 hours a week. They may not have insurance. So I think about those persons who may not have access to care. I would love to see providers, therapists, even if they're social workers, donate time back to the community. So that's one way, donate time back to the community. One. Two, it really goes back to the legislation. So for the state of North Carolina, going back to the General Assembly, we do have a government affairs branch in the organization that I work in for health insurance. So writing the letters to senators, writing letters to your House representative to really advocate for the type of care that we need. And building kind of like this groundswell, this people power around bringing the data to say, here are the adverse traumas that we're seeing in our school systems, in our communities. So to me, it's twofold. It's like boots on the ground, give back to the community, and then also advocate for policy changes.
Right. One of the other questions we had was, I know we talked about the disadvantages for people of color, but are there disadvantages for people identifying in the LGBTQ community when it comes to mental health?
Very quickly, it'll go back to kind of the earlier comments around the sense of shame and rejection. I think disproportionately, our LGBTQ youth and community members are bullied. They are violated in many different ways, whether it's sexually, emotionally. We have LGBTQ members who are still struggling with even some of the trauma or what they're assessing with their own growth. And again, it goes back to shame and silence and secrecy. And because of that, and not feeling comfortable with being able to come forward and say, here are the things that I'm struggling with, I think disproportionately we see this high rate of depression, suicide, what is it? Withdrawal, isolation. So there are other things that persons in the LGBT community are experiencing just because of the stigma with identifying. So I think that alone shields the ability to kind of come forward and receive the help that they would need for their mental wellness.
And I think with the way the changes are occurring right now, you're getting more and more people that are getting out of the field because of the fact that there are many times, it's kind of like a primary care physician. You don't get paid for everything that you do. Everything that you do is not billable. So yes, you can definitely donate time and things like that. And the challenge is going to be, probably many may say, well, I do that already, because there's so much that you cannot bill for. But when it comes to this particular community, what you're really looking at is the service providers. People have a tendency, I've just learned over the years, is we love this thing that someone has to be like us in order to help us. And I've just learned, regardless of the race or the culture, I can be open to learn. And that doesn't mean that I have to agree with. That doesn't mean I have to support in order to help heal. And when you have a mindset to this is a human being, one of the disadvantages, I think, is that sometimes we spend so much time trying to find, regardless of the community, but my experience has been even with the LGBTQ plus community, is sometimes we're spinning our wheels trying to find someone just like us to help us. And that may not be what you need. You just need someone that's willing to walk with you through your process of healing. Because some issues are, I hate to use the word, they're neutral. You know, depression is neutral. It doesn't have an identity on it. Grief is neutral. Trauma is neutral. So some of the things that we try to put in certain piles, I would like to say, if we're not careful, we will outsource or we will kind of disregard the help that is available because the person is, you know, doesn't have a flag up or a rainbow, you know, whatever the case may be. And I'll put it like this, you can support Black people and you can be a great therapist that's white, you know, but the person is willing to listen to the Black experience. They're not trying to be Black. So it's one of those things that I think sometimes we have to be open to receiving help. You know, it's kind of like when you're drowning, you don't care who jumps in to help you, you just want help. So sometimes we spin our wheels trying to quantify or qualify the help that's coming and maybe disregarding the help that's available. So that's what I think is part of the disadvantage that I've experienced is people are walking in wanting you to identify with every aspect of your life. And that's not primary care physicians don't do it. You know, but it's something about a mental health therapist that we want them to identify with everything, and that's not humanly possible. So I do think sometimes that's a slight disadvantage that if we're not careful, people are going to continue to get hurt because help is all around them, but it may not come in the package that they prefer.
One of the questions we got from Facebook is for someone who struggles and suffers from anxiety and struggles with regulating their nervous system, how would they go about breaking a pattern in order to start doing so?
I know for me personally, I just started doing joy reminders, joy alarms on my phone. So I have 2 joy alarms on my phone. One is for the morning, one is for at night. So where I can just take that minute, pause, see how I'm feeling about the day, how it's going, check and make sure that the emotions that I'm going through are really mine. And it's also just an opportunity to have a mini break, right? Also, and again, I'm not the doctor, there's a doctor on there, but you know, breathing exercises definitely help me. I start my morning that way. I make sure I take my breaks during the day, because again, hello workaholic, sometimes I'll work through all of those, but because I recognize who I am, I know what my habits are, and I know that I need to kind of break those. So making sure that I'm taking those breaks, walking away from whatever my workstation is, going outside, getting in nature. I love gratitude journals. That really helps me when I'm getting into like an anxious fit, because in my mind, it's not slowing down enough for me to get off of that wheel of the gloom and doom wheel. So if I take a step back and I say, okay, let me think about what I have to be grateful for. You know, I'm grateful that I have breath in my lungs because so many other people don't. I'm grateful that I have food in my belly. Let me drink some water. And, you know, just count 5 things that you're grateful for. You know, you can use aromatherapy. That's good too. You know, just to keep your area soothed and calm. A lot of times it's just, in my opinion, getting connected with yourself. And not worrying too much about the external, because you need to know exactly how you feel so you can slow yourself down.
I'd like to make a disclaimer. There is only one mental health professional on this panel. So any advice that you get is truly the opinions of those persons who are on the phone. I really would encourage persons who have concerns about their mental health to seek out a professional, but we can share some of the techniques that we've learned. So the associate pastor at the church that I'm on staff at, she taught during a really troublesome time of grief, she taught a technique called anchoring heart. And basically you kind of sit still, you meditate, you put your hand over your heart and you do this countdown to help recenter that energy. So I would, you can Google that because I can't remember exactly what it is now. But I would also ask that you would seek out mental health professionals or persons who may be seeking a therapist and see which things work for you. Essential oils, meditation, music therapy, sound therapy, yoga, massage. I mean, there's a plethora of things out here for people to cope. And that's what the mental health professional does. They give you coping mechanisms and tools to help you with those specific things that you may be dealing with in your personal life.
I would add, I always encourage people, I try to figure out what their morning routine is. You know, it was kind of like back in the day when we were growing up, you know, they would talk about the, was it Frosted Flakes, you know, Tony the Tiger, starting your day. But how do you start your day? You know, what is your prayer and meditation routine like? Do you get up and take that mile walk? Do you take that jog? Do you do some stretches? Do you do some deep breathing? This is what I say about some coping skills. So you don't use a hammer for everything. So coping skills is like a toolbox. So you have to have more than just a hammer and a screwdriver. Like we think the hammer and the screwdriver would just fix whatever, you know, I'm sorry, and some tape, some duct tape. We have 3. So, you know, we need more than that in our coping skill toolbox. And also the thing to know about coping skills are developed day to day. Coping skills are not developed in a crisis. When the first time that you pull out a coping skill is in a crisis, I can almost guarantee you it is not going to work. It's kind of like tying your shoes. Most of us at this age, we don't think about tying our shoes. Why? Because we have done it so many times. It is muscle memory at this point. Our coping skills, however, need to be like muscle memory. So your brain already knows what feels good. Your brain already knows the physical exercise increases the endorphins, you know, the happy hormones. It helps to self-regulate us in the mornings, those type things. You know, so then when you're stressed out at work and you need to take that walk, it's not so hard because your heart is already used to walking fast. But if your only walk is at the mall, you know, every other weekend, like it's not going to work in a crisis. So I always encourage people practice 5 to 10 minutes a day of coping skill work and get several skills that you perfect. Then when a crisis comes, you know what works in a crisis. That's kind of like that addictive behavior when we only run to things when we are stressed. I only use when I'm stressed. Why? Because for some reason, we think that gives us a fast release, right? So the same thing with coping skills. If we master it day to day, not praying just when you're in a crisis, but praying, the Bible says pray without ceasing. He said that for a reason, because he knew how we were going to have to work. And he knows if it's not somebody, it's us. So just that day-to-day work that we have to put in. And here's the thing, all of us have to work at it. I'm a mental health professional and I have to work on my coping skills day to day. I picked up a kickboxing class and I figured so I don't backslide, so I don't tell anybody off, I go hit the bags in the morning. I kick the bags instead of kicking somebody. So there are things, and I pray. So I can pray for you and hit the bag at the same time. Like I can do it all at one time. So we have to find ways Scripturally, we talk about singing songs and spiritual songs and hymns, finding those songs that bring us relief, help us regulate, not hype us up and make us, increase that intensity of anger, right? So there are different things that we can actually do that will help us. And I totally agree. I'm not trying to be anyone's therapist on this platform, but you have to take the time to build a therapeutic relationship with someone. And I will just tell you, it can take 8 to 10 sessions just to build a therapeutic relationship. We like to walk in with a therapist and think they're going to connect with us. I just met you. So why would I connect with you? Why would you connect with me? It takes time, just like any other relationship. But absolutely, we have to put the work in to get the outcomes that we're looking for.
Thank you. This has been very insightful. We've got one more question. And I think I'm just going to bring it back to Alamance County. What mental health options exist for us in Alamance County?
Well, all the ones that we've talked about before. Right now you have, that's a tough question because by now, if you're on Medicaid, you should already have your identified providers. You should have those cards already. If you don't, you need to reach out to your Medicaid workers. I will say, I talked to someone not too long ago, and they're saying like they've even reduced some of the requirements to receive Medicaid. So if you think about, we love to say what we can't qualify for when we didn't apply. So apply first. Let the system tell you you don't meet the criteria. Don't decide for yourself because of the pandemic. People are trying to make sure that we're, as a culture, as a nation, that we're okay. So you have that. You have the different insurance companies. You have the different managed care organizations. In Alamance County, it used to be Cardinal Innovations. Now it's called Medicaid Direct. And they have a number, and I'll try to look for it while we're on the line, but they have a number that you can actually call to get that information in for Medicaid. I can just give you the website. It's ncmedicaidplans.gov. That is if you already have Medicaid. I'm not certain how long the enrollment period is, but you can choose a health plan and primary care provider. That's the other thing to be aware of is when you choose, check with your primary care physicians first and make sure that they're accepting that version of Medicaid. So for example, some people chose Healthy Blue, which is a division of Blue Cross Blue Shield, but they found out their primary care physicians weren't accepting Healthy Blue. So you have to make sure that you're aligning yourself so you're just not losing your providers all over the place. If that relationship is not important to you and you've worked with that therapist and they've told you that that's what they're accepting, then go that way. But you need to I encourage everyone to make an informed decision. United Healthcare has a version of Medicaid right now. I think it's like 4 others. I'm not accepting them all, so I didn't take the time to learn them all. But if you find out that there are other entities out there, do your research and figure out what you need to get the services itself. But you absolutely, RHA is there. You have Solutions is there, Crossroads, Child Advocacy Center. They have an adult, even though it's Child Advocacy Center, they have adult programs there as well. Sometimes understand ask this question, what type of treatment will you provide? Because there are treatments that are more evidence-based that are shorter term. So you may not have to pay for a year. If you do the work, you may be done in 15 weeks, depending on the evidence-based practice that person utilizes. But it's just so much information. There's no way I can give it all to you at one time. Sometimes you can check like Psychology Today, that if you put in your zip code, they will tell you every therapist that's on their list. It's not all in Alamance County, but it will tell you the therapists in that area. And the way Medicaid is set up, particularly right now, you could probably see a clinician from anywhere because most people are doing telehealth now. So you're not even confined to just Alamance County anymore. You know, just sign up for what you really need and find who you need.
Dr. Walker gave all of the ones that I know of. I have personal experience with RHA, and for persons who are struggling with substance abuse and you don't have to have insurance, and they'll do your intake process. I'm not too sure about the mental health arm of that, but I do know for substance abuse, that is an option, free for those who may not have insurance, and then it's reduced for those who might have insurance. And then Crossroads is a free service for sexual violence, child victimization, human trafficking, and that's a free service. So those are the two that I have experience with. I know people who have visited that I know are available and are really reputable programs.
And I'm a huge advocate of Crossroads. They do incredible work. The advocate that you do get assigned, you know, that's like your partner that, you know, you can make contact with if, you know, you're having a bad moment, you need somebody to kind of talk you off the ledge. So, you know, I can't, you know, shout them out enough. They're fantastic. And all the other resources that were given, they're really good too. I do just, again, if you're working or if your spouse is working, I have to definitely say the Eap program, because it is free and you don't have to be on the company insurance for that. It's free to everyone that's in the building.
Also interject right here to say that we have a lot of mental health options in Alamance County, but going back to Dr. Walker's statement, it really depends on what you're looking for. I think that you have to be diligent in making sure that what you need is what you're searching for. So I will say that we are dropping the names of various practices in the comments on Facebook. They're also in the Zoom chat. But again, you're going to want to research those individuals or those practices to see if they can meet your needs. Some of them may only focus on children. Some of them may also see adults. So it's really kind of up to you to do your research and to kind of learn more about what they offer.
And that's all the questions that we have, Sharice. If you want to close us out, that'd be great.
All right. Well, based on y'all's comments on Facebook, y'all have really enjoyed this conversation. I must say that as somebody who has worked closely with all three of these wonderful women on our panel, I knew it would be phenomenal because they themselves are phenomenal. So I just want to thank Dr. Walker, Reverend Kersey, Adrian Barr for being with us today, for giving your personal, professional, and community-based opinions. I think it was important for people to hear your honesty at all levels. So thank you so much for showing up and showing out, as I knew you would. Thank you to Tony Riddle Autry, my favorite classmate, whose birthday is tomorrow, for moderating this panel. We hope that you have a wonderful birthday tomorrow and that you stay out of trouble, okay? And I will say that this is the third and final series event for the Systems of Our Culture. So we have talked to you all about the medical field, we've talked to you about mental health, and we've talked to you about education and SROs. I encourage you to go back and watch any of the videos. They are saved on my Facebook and they are public, so you can watch them whenever. This video will be uploaded to YouTube shortly so that I can kind of cut out the missed parts in the middle so that people on Facebook can watch all of it. I encourage you to share it. I know that some people texted me and said that you all had to leave early, but thank you so much to everybody who was able to tune in, whether you were here for the whole event or whether you just popped in and popped out. We greatly appreciate you. We hope that you share this video, and we hope that you all learn something from this that will change your life or help you change someone else's. Y'all have a great evening and be safe.
Thank you for having us. You as well. Bye.
Bye, y'all.
Thank you.